Ever wondered about a mysterious ape-like creature from Europe that could walk on two legs long before our famous ancestor Lucy?
And what if I told you that the idea of our genus, Homo, being the first toolmaker might not be entirely true? सोचो जरा.
Today we are diving deep into the incredible story of our earliest relatives. ये एक एडवेंचर जैसा है, filled with surprising discoveries, scientific debates.
और लूसी, टोंग बेबी एंड द हैंडीमैन जैसे कई इंटरेस्टिंग कैरेक्टर्स.
इससे पहले कि हम शुरू करें, जल्दी से सब्सक्राइब बटन दबा दो, लाइक करो और वो घंटी वाला आइकन भी ऑन कर लो, so that you never miss a journey like this. चलो शुरू करते हैं.
ओके, लेट्स अनपैक दिस.
हाँ, आज हम क्या-क्या कवर करेंगे, इसका एक क्विक मैप देख लेते हैं.
फर्स्ट हम मिलेंगे एक यूरोपियन मिस्ट्री से, ओरियोपिथिकस.
To meet the famous duo Australopithecus and Paranthropus and understand how and where they were found.
इसके बाद we'll get personal with the gracile australopithecines, including superstars like Lucy and the Tong baby.
फिर हम robust Australopithecus को समझेंगे, the tough vegetarians of the past.
Next up, we'll explore the different evolutionary theories, the family tree drama basically.
And finally, we will meet the first member of our own genus, the game changer, Homo habilis.
Ready?
Chalo, let's begin. So, topic 1, Oreopithecus.
Yes, Oreopithecus. So basically, Oreopithecus एक late Miocene anthropoid है from Europe.
Late Miocene मतलब उस टाइम के आसपास जब जंगल कम हो रहे थे, right?
Exactly, grasslands बढ़ रहे थे और इस वजह से प्राइमेट्स को पेड़ों से नीचे आना पड़ रहा था. ये सिवापिथिकस का कंटेम्प्रेरी था जो एशिया में रहता था.
और इसकी डिस्कवरी की स्टोरी वो तो काफी ड्रामेटिक है.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine an Italian coal miner in 1958. He's digging और अचानक उसे एक पूरा fossilized skeleton मिलता है.
A complete skeleton? Wow.
हाँ, ये किसी भी एंथ्रोपॉइड का पहला कंप्लीट फॉसिल था. दिस डिस्कवरी चेंज्ड एवरीथिंग, समझे? सडनली वैज्ञानिकों के पास एक पजल था. ये क्रीचर कौन था? एन एप, अ मंकी या फिर समथिंग क्लोजर टू अस?
It's fascinating because Oreopithecus is a mosaic. मतलब उसमें old world monkeys, apes और hominids तीनों के फीचर्स हैं. It's a very controversial figure in our evolutionary story.
बिल्कुल, और इसकी डिस्कवरी जर्नी तो डिबेट से भरी हुई है. इनिशियली 1872 में जब जॉ फ्रैगमेंट्स मिले तो लगा कि ये ओल्ड वर्ल्ड मंकी है.
Okay, पहले monkey समझा गया.
हाँ, बट देन हर्जलर ने प्रपोज किया कि नहीं, ये एक होमिनिड हो सकता है और 1958 का कंप्लीट फॉसिल उसने तो आग में घी डाल दिया.
Right. तो साइंटिस्ट एग्री क्यों नहीं कर पाए? Let's look at the evidence. What was so confusing?
एग्जैक्टली, द कंट्रोवर्सी इज ह्यूज. जैसे स्ट्राउस 1963 ने इसे अपनी ही फैमिली ओरियोपिथिसिडे में रख दिया.
एक अलग ही फैमिली बना दी.
हाँ, फिर सैलियन डेल्सन 1979 ने कहा नो, इट्स अ सर्कोपिथिकॉइड, यानी ओल्ड वर्ल्ड मंकी.
Okay, so a totally different direction.
राइट. फिर हैरिसन 1986 ने सजेस्ट किया कि इसका ओरिजिन प्रोकंसोलिडे से हुआ है. ग्रोव्स 1992 ने कंक्लूड किया कि ये एक होमिनॉइड है, बट उसमें की एप्स या होमो फीचर्स नहीं है.
It's all over the place. तो current thinking क्या है?
Currently, it's often aligned with the Pongo, यानी orangutan line, but the debate is far from over.
Okay, so what about its body? What made it so confusing? Let's get into the anatomy.
It's a fantastic mix. देखो, उसके old monkey-like features थे. जैसे उसके molars, वो old world monkeys जैसे थे with crests.
Crests on the molars. Got it.
But उसके hominid features भी थे. Teeth छोटे थे, canines छोटे थे, और premolar diastema, यानी gap नहीं था.
No gap? ये तो very human-like है.
और सुनो, hands, pelvis और leg bones suggest करते हैं कि it could walk bipedally. ये बहुत बड़ी बात है.
Wow. Bipedal locomotion in Europe? That early?
Yes, and here's the twist. उसके ape-like features भी थे. It had very long arms. Intermembral index था 120.
120. That means its arms was significantly longer than its legs.
Precisely. This means it was a true brachiator, an arm swinger. Probably Sivapithecus से भी बेहतर.
So what's the real-world impact of this? What does it all mean?
It means the overwhelming evidence points away from it being a monkey. It's a hominoid. But इसके unique features, especially the teeth, make it hard to place. इसीलिए तो उसे अपनी ही फैमिली ओरियोपिथिसिडे में रखा जाता है.
So Oreopithecus shows us that evolution isn't a straight line. ये तो मतलब full of experimental branches हैं.
Correct. And there's a growing demand to place it with hominids, which shows just how much it challenges our neat categories.
Cool, ना?
बहुत cool. एक question.
तो
ओरियोपिथिकस को बाइपीडल क्यों माना जाता है, even with its long arms?
Good question. It's because of its pelvis and leg bones. The iliac blade was broadened or talus neck short and broad था. Features that support bipedal locomotion.
Okay.
याद रखना, long arms brachiation के लिए हैं and leg structure bipedalism के लिए. It was a dual-purpose creature.
Got it. And what's the single biggest reason for the controversy around its classification?
The teeth. उसके molars में crests थे, like old world monkeys, but उसका overall dental pattern, small canines, no diastema, वो बहुत hominid-like था. This conflict is the core of the debate. Makes sense. If it was a brachiator, was it living in dense forests?
Most likely, yes. Brachiation is an adaptation for moving through trees, but the climate was changing to woodlands and savannas.
Which might explain the development of bipedalism for ground movement.
Right.
Exactly. How does the 1958 complete fossil change the game?
Before that, we only had fragments. A complete skeleton allows us to calculate things like the intermembral index, arm to leg ratio, और पूरी body plan को एक साथ study करने देता है. It gave a holistic picture for the first time.
Right. Last question on this. Why is it sometimes aligned with the orangutan, Pongo line?
This is based on more detailed comparative anatomy. It likely relates to specific shared traits in the skull or limbs that point to a common ancestor with the Asian great ape line rather than the African ape hominid line.
Interesting. Okay, let's try a practice cue.
Sure.
Now pause and practicing this aloud. Oreopithecus was a late Miocene hominoid from Europe with a mosaic of features. Hominid-like bipedal adaptations, but ape-like arms for brachiation.
Perfect.
So, mini recap. In short, Oreopithecus is our first puzzle, a European relative that breaks all the simple rules of evolution.
बिल्कुल.
Okay, Europe से निकलकर let's fly to Africa, the cradle of humankind. यहाँ a whole new chapter begins.
Yes. Topic 2. Introduction to Australopithecus and Paranthropus.
So these two genera represent a diverse group of bipedal hominids that lived in Africa from about 4.2 to 1 million years ago. Basically, ये हमारे direct ancestors और उनके close cousins हैं.
Right.
और यहाँ एक micro story है जो बताती है कि हमें इनके fossils कैसे मिले. Imagine this. A predator, maybe a leopard, hunts an early hominid.
Okay. It drags the body back to its lair, a dark limestone cave. Centuries pass, the bones fossilize. Then, in the 1940s, scientists find a skull with 2 puncture marks that perfectly match a leopard's canines.
No way.
Yes, this single fossil, SK54, tells a dramatic story of life and death and also explains how these fossils ended up in South African caves.
That's incredible. So here's why it gets really interesting. This group is split into 2 main forms. Think of them as 2 different strategies for survival.
Correct. On one hand, you have the gracile forms, genus Australopithecus. These are the slender species, like A. africanus and A. afarensis.
And they are considered the line leading to us, to Homo.
Exactly. On the other hand, you have the robust forms, genus Paranthropus. These were larger, with bigger brains and massive molars. They are seen as an extinct side branch.
An aberrant sideline adapted for a very tough vegetarian diet.
Bilkul.
So where and how did we find them?
The story starts in 1924 with Raymond Dott in Town, South Africa, who found the first A. africanus fossil. Since then, fossils have been found all over South, East, and even Central Africa. Importantly, there's no evidence of them outside Africa.
And the way they were found is different in South and East Africa, right? ये point important है.
Yes, and this is crucial. South African sites, जैसे Tong, Starkfontein, यहाँ fossils limestone caves में है. The belief is they didn't live there.
Right, the predator story.
Yes, predators brought their bones in. The leopard punctured skull is prime evidence.
And East Africa?
East African sites like Olduvai, Letuli, यहाँ fossils open settings में मिले हैं. Lake shores, river valleys. It's believed they were inhabitants of these places.
Okay, so that gives us a better idea of their actual habitat.
Exactly. Plus, these sites have volcanic layers, which allows for more accurate potassium argon dating.
So basically the context tells us about their life. East African sites give us a glimpse of where they lived, while South African sites tell us what hunted them. That's super cool.
This distinction is fundamental. It not only tells us about their paleoecology, but also affects how we date them and interpret their behavior. It sets the stage for understanding the individual species.
Okay, let's do some cross-questioning. Why is Paranthropus considered a sideline?
Because their anatomy, especially their massive jaws and teeth, shows extreme specialization for a specific diet.
Specialization?
Yes, such specialization often leads to extinction when the environment changes. The line leading to Homo was more generalized and adaptable.
What is potassium argon dating and why is it better in East Africa?
It's a radiometric dating method used on volcanic rock. East Africa's Great Rift Valley has a lot of volcanic activity, so fossil layers are often sandwiched between datable layers of volcanic ash.
और South Africa में ये नहीं है?
Right, South Africa's cave deposits lack this, making dating more difficult.
If Australopithecus didn't live in the South African caves, where did they live?
The evidence suggests they lived in the surrounding woodlands and savannas. The caves were simply the final resting place for some of them, thanks to predators.
Got it. Who were the first 2 key discoverers of this group?
Raymond Dart, who discovered the Tong baby in 1924, and Robert Broom, who confirmed Dart's findings with an adult cranium from Sturkfontein in 1936. Yaad rakhna.
Dart and Broom. Okay, can you name one major site in South Africa and one in East Africa?
Definitely. For South Africa, remember Sturkfontein. For East Africa, remember Olduvai Gorge or Letuli. These are classic sites.
Perfect. Let's practice. Say this out loud. Australopithecines are divided into gracile forms, our ancestors, and robust forms, an extinct side branch. They are only found in Africa.
Nicely put.
And the mini recap. In short, the Australopithecines were a diverse group of African hominids, and where we find their fossils tells us as much as the fossils themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, now that we know the basics, let's zoom in and meet the family. First up, the gracile lineage, the direct line to us.
Let's do it. Topic 3. The gracile species are direct ancestors.
So, the gracile species are the lighter, more slender members of the Australopithecus genus. They are considered the main line of evolution that eventually led to Homo.
Yes. And here's the most famous microstory of them all. Picture this. Ethiopia, 1974. Donald Johanson's team is surveying a hot, dry gully.
And the Beatles are playing.
Yes, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is blasting from their camp's tape recorder. That afternoon, they spot a tiny piece of an arm bone, then another and another.
And they end up finding 40% of a single skeleton.
Correct. They named her Lucy, and she became the world's most famous human ancestor. This is how science happens, a mix of hard work, luck, and a great soundtrack.
I love that story. So we're going to meet several gracile species, each adding a crucial piece to the human evolution puzzle.
Yes, these species show the progression of bipedalism and other hominid traits over millions of years. Each discovery has challenged and refined our understanding of our family tree.
Okay, let's do a roll call. First, Australopithecus africanus.
This is the species of the Tong baby, found in 1924. This child's fossil was a game changer.
क्योंकि उसमें वो foramen magnum था.
Exactly. An anteriorly placed foramen magnum, proving bipedialism. Uska brain tha 400-500 cc. A 2015 study suggests it was a tool user with a power thumb.
A power thumb. And tragically, a puncture mark suggests it was killed by an eagle.
Yes, a sad end.
Wow. Next, the superstar. Australopithecus afrensis.
This is Lucy's species, dated to around 3.77 MYA. They were small, about 3.5 feet tall, with a brain of 400 cc.
और इसके bipedalism का evidence तो overwhelming है.
Overwhelming. Angled femur, spinal curvatures, and a converging big toe. Recent studies suggest Lucy might have died from a fall from a tall tree.
A fall. Interesting. Okay, here's a newer one. Australopithecus sediba.
Discovered in 2008 in South Africa, dated to 2 Maya. It's called a game changer because it's a potential transitional link to Homo.
Okay, a link to Homo. What features did it have?
It had a small brain, but an enlarged frontal lobe for higher mental ability and a very human-like pelvis.
The pelvis is key for bipedalism, right?
Absolutely.
What about Australopithecus guy?
The name means surprise, and it really was one. Dated to 2.6 Maya, it was found with stone tools that are 1 million years older than those associated with Homo habilis.
1 million years older. This discovery seriously challenged the idea that Homo pioneered tool use.
It completely turned that idea on its head.
And a few others quickly.
Sure. A. anamensis, 3.9 to 4.2 Maya, is the oldest with a tibia resembling Homo. A. diaremida, 3.3 to 3.5 Maya, was a close relative of Afarensis, possibly adapted to harsher food.
And there's one from Central Africa, right?
Yes, Agir Beher Ghazali, nicknamed Abel. It's the only one from Central Africa, suggesting a much wider hominid distribution than we previously thought.
So this isn't a simple ladder of ABC. It's more like a bush with many different species living at the same time, possibly interacting.
Ajagarhi, using tools, is a huge deal.
Precisely. The gracile Australopithecines show a period of intense evolutionary experimentation. Bipedalism was established, but different species were trying out different adaptations.
और अगीरगारही on Sediba की discoveries ने तो
उन्होंने तो हमारा view of the immediate ancestor of Homo को completely reshape कर दिया है.
fascinating. Let's get to questions. What is the foramen magnum? And why is its position so important? It's the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord connects. In quadrupeds, it's at the back. In bipeds, it's positioned centrally underneath the skull to balance the head. The Tong baby's anterior placement was key evidence for bipedalism.
Right. And why was Lucy's discovery so important if other fossils were already found?
Because she was 40% complete. This was unheard of. It allowed scientists to study the relationship between different parts of the body, like limb proportions, in a single individual, providing a much clearer picture of her species.
So it's the completeness of the skeleton. Okay. Which species is the strongest candidate for being a direct ancestor to Homo and why?
It's a tie between Agarhi and A. sediba. Agarhi is older and has the cultural link, the tools.
And Sediba?
A. sediba is younger but has more advanced physical features, like the pelvis and hand, that are very Homo-like.
What does Ibel from Central Africa tell us?
It breaks the East Side Story narrative that all major evolution happened in East or South Africa. It opens up a third window and suggests hominids were more widespread than we thought.
Very cool. Last one. How can a fossil tell us if a hominid had a power thumb?
By studying the detailed anatomy of the thumb bones and comparing them to modern humans and other primates. The shape and muscle attachment points on the bone can reveal how the thumb was used for a powerful grip, which is essential for tool use.
Incredible detail. Okay, practice time. Practice this. The gracile Australopithecines, like Lucy, A. afrensis, and the Tong baby A. africanus, were early bipeds, and later species like Agarhi and A. sediba are strong candidates for the ancestry of Homo.
Great summary.
Mini recap. In short, the gracile species were a diverse and successful group that laid the evolutionary groundwork for our own genus.
Well said.
Okay, we've met the slender line. Now, let's meet their bigger, tougher cousins, the robusts.
Yes. Topic 4. The robust species Paranthropus, a different path.
So the robusts were a group of Australopithecines characterized by massive skulls, jaws, and teeth adapted for a diet of tough, fibrous vegetarian food. They belonged to their own genus, Paranthropus.
Bilkul. And the micro story here is classic. Imagine the famous paleontologist duo Louis and Mary Leakey digging in Olduvai Gorge in 1959.
Leakey, the name is legendary.
It is. They find a skull that is incredibly, well, robust. It has a massive sagittal crest.
That's the ridge of bone on top of the skull, like a mohawk.
Exactly. Or enormous molars. They nicknamed it Nutcracker Man. This wasn't on the direct line to humans. It was something else entirely. A specialized chewing machine that went extinct. A fascinating evolutionary dead end.
These guys took a different evolutionary path. Instead of becoming more adaptable like our ancestors, they became specialists.
Their entire anatomy screams chewing power. They had a pronounced sagittal crest for massive jaw muscle attachment, large supraorbital ridges, yani brow ridges, and massive zygomatic arches, the cheekbones.
And their teeth?
Their premolars and molars were huge, massive.
So who are the members of this robust club?
There are two main ones. First, Paranthropus robustus. This is the South African species, found at sites like Kromdraai and Swartkrans. They lived from about 2.3 to 1.8 MIA.
Okay, robustus from South Africa.
And then there's Paranthropus boisei. This is the East African species, but the original Nutcracker Man. They lived from 1.8 to 1 Maya.
And there was an earlier one too, right? The black skull.
Yes, a more primitive form, A. ethiopicus, the black skull, is now considered an early boisei.
So what's the real-world impact here? Why do they matter so much?
What's fascinating here is that they coexisted with our direct ancestors, including early Homo. This means the ancient African landscape had multiple hominid species living side by side, likely competing for resources.
It was an empty stage waiting for humans to appear. It was a crowded stage.
A very crowded stage.
So Paranthropus shows us that being bigger and stronger isn't always the winning strategy in evolution. Specialization can be a risk.
Exactly. When their specific food source dwindled due to climate change, they couldn't adapt and eventually went extinct.
All right, question time. What is a sagittal crest for? Do humans have it?
It's an anchor point for massive temporalis muscles, the main chewing muscles. Modern humans do not have it because our jaws and diet don't require that much chewing force. It's a feature seen in animals with powerful bites, like gorillas.
Right. Were the robusts bigger than the gracile in body size?
Their skulls were much more massive, but their body sizes were not dramatically different. They were on the heavier end of the scale, say 40 to 80 kilograms. The term robust really refers to their skull and dental anatomy.
Not their overall body. Understood. If they ate tough vegetarian food, what could that include?
Thoda soch lo. It could be hard nuts, seeds, roots, and tubers. Things that require a lot of grinding and crushing.
Makes sense. Who discovered Paranthropus boisei?
L.S.B. Leakey and Mary Leakey in 1959. They originally named it Zinjanthropus boisei.
Okay, classic leaky discovery. Last one. Did robust Australopithecines use tools?
The source material doesn't specify tool use for them, but some research outside our sources suggests they might have used bone tools for digging. However, the complex stone tool culture is primarily associated with the Homo line.
Okay, let's do the practice cue. Practice saying this. Paranthropus, the robust Australopithecines, were a specialized side branch with massive skulls and teeth for a tough vegetarian diet, and they eventually went extinct.
Perfect.
And the mini recap. In short, the robusts were the powerful chewing specialists of the hominid world, a fascinating example of an evolutionary experiment that didn't last.
Couldn't have said it better.
Okay, we've met all the players. Now, how do we fit them all together? Let's look at the competing theories for our family tree. It's detective time.
So, topic 5. Evolutionary theories. This is where it gets complicated.
So these are the scientific models proposed to explain the relationships between the different Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and Homo species. Basically, who evolved from whom?
Right, and creating a family tree from scattered fossils is tough. New discoveries can completely change the picture. Let's look at how the theories have evolved.
Okay, first up, the two-branch theory.
Proposed in 1979 by Johanson and White. It's simple. At 3 Maya, A. afarensis splits.
Lucy species is the split point.
Yes, one branch is the Australopithic line, A. africanus, A. robustus, A. boisei, and the other is the Homo line, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens.
Simple enough. But then a discovery complicated things, leading to the three-branch theory, right?
Exactly. The discovery of the black skull, A. ethiopicus, an early robust form from 2.5 MY, this suggested that the East African robusts boisei evolved directly from Ethiopicus and not from the South African robustus.
Acha, so it separated the robust lines.
Yes, so a new model with 3 branches from a common ancestor was proposed.
One line to Homo, one to East African robusts, and one to South African robusts.
Correct. The boisei line and the Africanus robustus line.
So where do we stand today? What's the current belief?
It's a variant of the two-branch theory, but more refined. A. africanus is still seen as the basal or root hominid.
But the ancestor to Homo has changed.
Exactly. The line to Homo is now thought to go through species like A. gahi and A. sediba. They have usurped the place of being the immediate ancestor of Homo.
So A. africanus is no longer seen as our direct ancestor.
Correct. And the robust forms are definitely seen as a side branch that went extinct.
This shows how science works. It's not about being right forever. It's about updating your ideas based on new evidence. The discovery of just one skull, the black skull, was enough to make scientists rethink the entire family tree.
The current model is the most robust, but it's still a hypothesis. A new fossil discovery tomorrow could change everything again. The key takeaway is that A. afarensis is the likely ancestor of all later groups, and that A. garhi and A. sediba are now the front runners for being our direct Australopithecine ancestor.
Great summary. Let's ask some questions to solidify this. In the two-branch theory, what was the proposed relationship between robustus and boisei?
It proposed that the South African A. robustus evolved into the East African A. boisei. The three-branch theory separated these two into distinct evolutionary lines.
What is a basal hominid?
Basal means it's at the base or root of a particular branch of the evolutionary tree. So saying A. afarensis is basal means it's the common ancestor from which later gracile and robust forms evolved.
Why did A. gargi and A. sediba usurp the place of A. africanus as our ancestor?
Because they show a better combination of features linking them to Homo. A. garhi had the tool culture at the right time, older than H. habilis.
And sediba had the anatomy?
Yes, A. sediba had the advanced physical anatomy like the pelvis and hand that looked very Homo-like. A. afarensis now looks less like a direct ancestor and more like a cousin.
Who proposed the original two-branch theory?
Donald Johnson and Timothy White in 1979. Remember Johnson? He's the one who discovered Lucy.
Right, of course. Are all these theories mutually exclusive?
Build on each other. The current belief is really a modification of the two-branch theory, informed by the evidence that led to the three-branch theory. It's an evolution of ideas.
Love that. An evolution of ideas. Okay, let's practice. Now pause and practice saying this. The current theory suggests A. afarensis was a basal hominid, with A. garhi and A. sediba being the most likely immediate ancestors to the genus Homo.
Excellent.
Mini recap. In short, our family tree is a work in progress, constantly updated with new fossils that challenge old ideas.
That's the beauty of science.
And that brings us to the final and most important character in our story today. The one who crosses the line from Australopithecus to us. Let's meet Homo habilis.
The big one. Topic 6, Homo habilis.
So Homo habilis, meaning handyman, is the earliest recognized member of our own genus Homo. They emerged around 2 million years ago and are distinguished by a larger brain and a definite association with making stone tools.
Right. And here's a micro story to set the scene. Imagine you're an early Homo habilis. You need to get marrow from a bone or cut meat from a carcass. Your teeth aren't strong enough.
So you need a tool.
Yes. So you pick up a rock, a hammerstone. You strike another rock, a core. A sharp flake breaks off. Suddenly, you have a cutting tool.
It's not just using an object, it's manufacturing a tool for a specific purpose.
Exactly. This simple act is a massive cognitive leap. This is the world of the older one industry, the beginning of technology.
This is a major turning point. With Homo habilis, we see a significant expansion in the brain and the beginning of culture in the form of the older one tool industry.
The first fossils were found by Louis Leakey in Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, in 1960-61. He saw it as an intermediate between Australopithecus and Homo sapiens. A key fossil is KNMER 1470, found in 1972.
Oh, 1470 is a famous one.
It is. It had a large brain volume of 750 ml and a more human-shaped brain case.
So what made them Homo? What are the key features?
Three main things. First, cranial capacity. It ranged from 650 to 800 cc, a huge jump from the 400 cc of A. afarensis. Endocast studies show the frontal lobe, the seat of higher mental abilities, was developing.
Okay, bigger brain. What's second?
Second, dental features. The teeth, mandible, and dental arcade were all more human-like and less massive than in Australopithecines.
More gracile teeth. And third, obviously, is technology.
Third, and most famously, technology. The older one industry. This toolkit included cutting tools, flakes, scraping tools, and tools to make tools, hammerstones.
And we know what they were used for.
Yes, analysis shows they were used to cut meat, wood, and plants, indicating a more omnivorous diet.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
The controversies.
Yes, there are big ones. First, tool use pre-habilis. The idea that habilis started it all is challenged.
Right, we talked about Australopithecus gari.
Exactly. Their tools are dated to 2.6 Maya, older than habilis. Plus, modern chimps can make and use tools, with Kanzi, the chimp, even making older one like flakes.
So the capacity for tool making isn't uniquely Homo.
It seems not. The second controversy is morphological variation. The fossils we call H. habilis are very different from each other. KNMER 1470 is large-brained, while KNMER 1813 is small-brained, 500 cc.
That's a huge difference.
It is. This has led some, like Bernard Ward, to split them into two species. H. rudolfensis, broader-faced, and H. habilis, narrower-faced.
So the handyman might actually be two different handy people?
Potentially. The shift to a meat-inclusive diet was revolutionary. Acquiring meat requires new skills, and neural tissue, the brain, is energetically costly to maintain. A high-protein diet likely fueled the brain's rapid expansion.
The classic feedback loop. Better tools, more meat, bigger brain, even better tools.
Exactly that loop.
So Homo habilis represents the dawn of our genus. They had bigger brains, made sophisticated tools, and changed their diet, setting our lineage on a new evolutionary trajectory.
But the story is complex, with other species possibly using tools before them and a lot of variation within the group itself.
Okay, let's nail this with some questions. What three types of tools were in the older one industry?
Cutting tools, flakes, scraping tools, and tools to make tools, hammerstones. Simple but effective.
How did the diet of Homo habilis likely affect its evolution?
Adding meat provided a dense source of calories and protein, which is thought to have been essential for supporting a larger, more energy-demanding brain. This dietary shift is a key driver in human evolution.
What is the main evidence challenging the idea that Homo habilis was the first tool maker?
Two things. First, stone tools found with Australopithecus gardi that are older. Second, the observed tool-making abilities of modern apes like Kanzi, which show that the cognitive capacity for it isn't unique to Homo.
Why do some scientists want to split Homo habilis into two species?
Because of the huge variation in the fossils, the difference in cranial capacity and facial structure between fossils like KNM ER 1470 and KNM ER 1813 is so large that some argue it's too much variation for a single species.
Got it. And what part of the brain saw development in Homo habilis?
Endocasts show development of the frontal lobe, which is associated with higher mental abilities like planning and problem solving. Also, Broca's area, linked to vocalization, showed enlargement.
Fascinating. Okay, let's practice one last time. Say this. Homo habilis, the first of our genus, had a larger brain and created the older one tool industry, but the story of tool use is more complex than we once thought.
A perfect way to put it.
Mini recap. In short, Homo habilis was our innovative ancestor who kick-started technology, but they were part of a much more complex and diverse world.
That's the big picture.
Understanding our ancient relatives.
And here's what we discovered.
Oreopithecus, a mysterious European hominoid, part biped, part brachiator, that shows evolution isn't a straight line.
Australopithecus and Paranthropus, the diverse African pioneers, split into the adaptable, gracile line, our ancestors, and the specialized robust line, an extinct side branch.
Gracile species, we met a whole caste, from bipedal superstar Lucy, A. afarensis, to the game-changing tool user A. gahi and the transitional A. sediba.
Evolutionary theories. We saw how our understanding of the family tree has changed, with A. afarensis as the root and Garhi sediba as the leading candidates for our direct ancestor.
And Homo habilis, the handyman, the dawn of our genus with bigger brains and the older one tool culture. Though the story of who was first is now a thrilling debate.
That covers it.
Now, to make sure this all sticks, I want listeners to try something. Pause after each question and try to answer it out loud in 1 or 2 sentences. Ready?
First question.
Number 1. What are the 3 main types of features found in Oreopithecus?
Number 2. What is the key difference between how fossils were deposited in South Africa versus East Africa?
Number 3. Name 2 key features that prove Lucy, A. afarensis, was bipedal.
Number 4. Why is Paranthropus considered an evolutionary dead end?
Number 5. Which 2 gracile species are the strongest candidates for being the immediate ancestor of Homo?
And the last one, number 6. What is the biggest controversy surrounding Homo habilis and tool use?
These great questions. And now, here's a simple challenge. Pick one of the hominids we discussed today. Lucy, the Tong baby, or Homo habilis. Rehearse presenting a 1-minute summary of that hominid out loud. Explain who they were, why they were important, and one cool fact about them. Try it.
That's a great exercise.
And that's our deep dive for today. From a mysterious European ape to the first tool makers in Africa, the story of our origins is full of twists and turns. Remember, every fossil is a clue and the story is still being written.
Bilkul.
If you love this journey into the past, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell because we have so much more to explore together. Drop a comment below and tell us which hominid you found most fascinating.
We'd love to know.
Until next time, stay curious.